everyone, especially when you get to be my age, you think of the possibility of writing a memoir. Now, I really didn't seriously think of this, but my daughters, I have 3 daughters, and they kept saying, Mom, you have to write down these stories, like the story of the beheading in the marketplace. The story. But anyways, I had to think about whether I would write these down, and one day I thought, oh, they're bugging me so much, so I'm going to go to the computer, and I thought I'd have 10 pages. And after 100 single-space pages, I still had memories that kept coming and coming to me. And this is very usual from people that I've talked to who thought, well, I don't have anything to write about. My life has been very boring. It's not as exciting because you were raised in Brazil. Yet when they sit down and start writing, a flood of memories come, and you just have to cut them off. So if your family has asked you to do this, or you thought of writing a memoir, don't worry about not having material. My mother-in-law, I like to talk about, in that she had an extraordinary life. She's the world's best mother-in-law. When she was, she was born in 1896. When she graduated from high school, went to college, got a degree, went to Paris, studied voice at Fontainebleau, did summers with Chautauqua. And this was in the early 1920s. She was in quartets, duets, solos, and they traveled in tents from one city to another in Iowa and southern Minnesota. She married a man who was 13 years younger than she was, had a child. The child died of leukemia at age 2, and 3 years later my husband was born. Her husband died, and I think what was interesting to me is men came out of the woodwork. One banker paid the mortgage on her house. Another man bought her car. There was a judge who wanted to marry her. And we said, Mom, you've got to write your story. You have to write your story. And for years we bugged her about writing a story. She sat down, came to us with 2.5 pages. And nothing that I told her about is in here. Some people don't want to share. They don't want to let other people know. It's their private life. And this was very difficult for me when I was writing my memoir, because I had to write about people who maybe didn't want this story told. And I'm talking about my relatives. There were things that in the process of growing up. So the big decision that I had to make was, am I going to use real names? And anybody who writes a memoir will have that question. I use all real names except for one instance where I felt it would hurt. It was a cousin of mine. And although her memory is weak, she's in her early 80s and she's in a nursing home, I would feel terrible if she knew what went on. And nobody's ever talked about this particular period of her life that I talk about in my book. So I did change her name. And I felt there was no need to put her real name. It wouldn't take away from the story at all. And another thing that I had to think about is that, do I want my children to know my grammar, how terrible it is? See, I was raised in Brazil. My first language is Portuguese. And so my punctuation is bad, and of course Word corrects your spelling, so that was wonderful. But how do I make this into a book form? So we decided to look for a ghostwriter. And after asking people if they would be interested in writing on the internet, we found all kinds of companies that represent ghostwriter, and they're on commission. You contact them, and then they contact the ghostwriters. And I had people from all over the world, actually, and all over the U.S. who were ghostwriters interested in writing my story. I sent it to 3 people, and I sent 1 chapter to 3 people. When that chapter came back from Janine, the woman I chose, I just cried and cried, because there was a connection. I sent the chapter on my father's funeral, and she added things to it, and everything she added, yes, that's what happened during that period, and the emotion, and we really connected. And so we decided to hire her for a ghostwriter. She did a wonderful job. It was a very emotional process working with her. And I would be on the second floor working on my computer, and I would get an email and I'd be sobbing, and Bill would be downstairs and he'd say, "Oh, you got another chapter from Janine." He got to know that it would be this way. So in the process of writing this story, it was a very healing process, a very emotional process. And that's, I think, I attribute a lot of that to getting a good ghostwriter.